He beat Wayne Gretzky, not in a game, not in a series, for an entire season. In 1980, when the Great One was rewriting hockey history as a 19-year-old phenomenon, there was one guy who looked at the stats sheet and said, "Not today." Marcel Dionne finished the season tied with Gretzky at 137 points. And because he scored more goals, he won the Art Ross Trophy, the only time in the 80s that someone not named Gretzky or Lemieux would hold it. Most people don't remember this. But that's par for the course for Marcel Dionne, because while he dominated the NHL and landed 6th in all-time scoring with more goals per game and points per game than everyone ahead of him not named Gretzky, he's largely forgotten in the conversation of all-time greats. But not today. Today we tell the story of Marcel Dionne, the 5'8" superstar who is one of the most underrated players in hockey history. Before we start, give this video a like if you think Marcel deserves more glory and subscribe for more classic hockey stories. Now, to understand how someone this dominant could be forgotten, you need to go back to the very beginning, because from the moment Marcel Dionne laced up his skates, he was fighting an uphill battle. Born in Drummondville, Quebec in 1951, Dionne wasn't built like a typical hockey player. He was stocky. He had legs like tree trunks. He wasn't the graceful, flowing skater that scouts drooled over. He was a fire hydrant on skates, impossible to knock over and deceptively fast. They nicknamed him Little Beaver, after a popular midget wrestler of the same name, because he was short for a hockey player and played with relentless tenacity. In junior hockey, playing for the St. Catharines Blackhawks in the OHA, he wasn't just good. He was a glitch in the system. In the 1968-69 season, as a 17-year-old, he put up 100 points. The next year, 132 points. But it was the 1970-71 season that should have made him the undisputed king of amateur hockey. In just 46 games, Marcel Dionne scored 62 goals and added 81 assists for 143 points. That is an average of over 3 points per game. He was destroying the league. In any other year, Dionne would have been the unanimous, no-questions-asked #1 pick in the NHL draft. But 1971 wasn't a normal year. Hundreds of miles away in Quebec City, there was another French-Canadian phenomenon, Guy Lafleur. He was tall, he was blonde, he was fast, he played for the Quebec Remparts, and he was electrifying crowds. The prize wasn't just being drafted first, it was being drafted by the Montreal Canadiens. The Habs, through brilliant GM wizardry by Sam Pollock, held the first overall pick in 1971. The entire province of Quebec was screaming for them to take Lafleur. He looked like the next Jean Béliveau. He fit the mold. Marcel, on the other hand, was short, played in Ontario, and didn't have the look. So, on draft day, the Montreal Canadiens walked up to the podium and selected Guy. Marcel Dionne fell to number 2. He was selected by the Detroit Red Wings. Think about the psychology of that moment. Lafleur went to the greatest organization in hockey history, a team stacked with Hall of Famers fresh off a Stanley Cup. Dionne went to the Detroit Red Wings, a team that was essentially a dumpster fire in the early 70s. The narrative was set in stone before he played a single NHL shift. Lafleur was the chosen one, and Dionne was the other guy. Dionne arrived in Detroit in the fall of 1971, and he played like a man possessed. He wanted to prove Montreal wrong. In his rookie season, Dionne shattered the NHL rookie scoring record at the time, scoring 28 goals and 49 assists for 77 points. But while he was filling the net, the Red Wings were losing games. Gordie Howe retired just as Dionne was arriving, and the Wings' leadership didn't know how to put the pieces together in his absence. And they missed the playoffs in his rookie year. Dionne kept getting better. By his 3rd season, he was averaging more than a point per game, but the team was going nowhere. The coaching was a revolving door, and the fans in Detroit were losing patience, not with Dionne, but with the franchise. Then came the 1974-75 season. This was the year Marcel Dionne officially signaled that he was a superstar. He exploded. He scored 47 goals, he added 74 assists, he finished with 121 points. He was the 3rd leading scorer in the entire National Hockey League, trailing only Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito. And what did the Red Wings do? They had their worst season in the Dionne era. Dionne was 23 years old, he had just put up one of the greatest individual seasons in Red Wings history, and he was watching the playoffs on TV. Again. He saw Montreal winning cups with Lafleur, he saw the Flyers winning cups with Bobby Clarke, and he saw himself rotting in Detroit. He'd had enough. In a move that was incredibly bold for the era, Dionne demanded a trade. The relationship fractured. Dionne was a free agent, but free agency back then wasn't like it is today. You couldn't just sign anywhere without your old team getting massive compensation. The Los Angeles Kings, owned by the flamboyant Jack Kent Cooke, wanted a star. They wanted to sell hockey in Hollywood. Cooke looked at the stats, saw the 121 points, and opened his checkbook. Dionne signed with Los Angeles. It was a massive deal, 5 years, $1.5 million, which was astronomical money in 1975. The Kings paid, well, a king's ransom. They sent their captain Terry Harper, tough guy Dan Maloney, and a second-round draft pick to Detroit just to get the rights to Dionne. When Marcel landed in Los Angeles in 1975, he might as well have landed on Mars. This was not a hockey town. The Kings played at the Forum, which they shared with the Lakers. The ice was famously terrible because of the constant basketball changeovers. The crowds were, let's call them casual. People would show up in the second period. Celebrities would sit by the glass but not know what icing was. And because of the time zones, nobody back east saw him play. By the time the puck dropped in LA, the sports reporters in Toronto and Montreal were already asleep. This is where the legend of the Phantom Superstar truly begins. In his first year in LA, Dionne put up 94 points. In his second year, he scored 53 goals and 122 points. He was arguably the most talented offensive player in the world, not named Guy Lafleur. But he was invisible to the general public. He was putting on clinics night after night in front of 10,000 people in Inglewood while the hockey world obsessed over the Habs and the Flyers. But something was building in LA. Dionne was finally getting a taste of playoff hockey, and in the late 70s, in Dionne's prime, the Kings gave him some help. In January 1979, the Kings coach, Bob Berry, decided to try a new line combination. He took Dionne, the 5'8" playmaker, and put him between two guys who couldn't have been more different. On the left wing, he put Charlie Simmer. Simmer was a skyscraper, 6'3", a guy who had bounced around the minors and was nearly out of hockey. He wasn't fast, but he had hands and he was impossible to move from the front of the net. On the right wing, he put Dave Taylor. Taylor was a college kid from Clarkson University, a scrappy, hard-working grinder who hit everything that moved and had a surprising scoring touch. They called them the Triple Crown Line. It shouldn't have worked. You had a tiny center, a slow giant on the left, and a banger on the right, but it was magic. The chemistry was instantaneous. Taylor would go into the corner and dig the puck out like a dog with a bone. He'd feed it to Dionne. Dionne would use those tree trunk legs to spin off a defender, draw two guys to him, and then thread a blind pass to the slot. And there was Charlie Simmer, standing in the office tapping it into an empty net. For the next few years, the Triple Crown Line was arguably the most dangerous unit in hockey. In the 1979-80 season, the line combined for staggering numbers. Simmer scored 56 goals. Taylor scored 37 goals. And Dionne? He was the engine. This brings us to the greatest individual battle of Dionne's career, the year he went toe-to-toe with the Great One. By the 1979-80 season, the NHL had changed. The WHA had folded, and the Edmonton Oilers had joined the league. That meant Wayne Gretzky was now an NHL player. Gretzky was 19 years old. He was a phenomenon. He was rewriting the physics of the sport. Every headline was about the Great One. But quietly in Los Angeles, the 28-year-old Dionne was matching him point for point. It became a two-horse race for the Art Ross Trophy, awarded to the league's leading scorer. All season long, they traded the lead. Gretzky would get 3 points. Dionne would get 3 points. He was playing some of the best hockey of his life. He scored 53 goals that year. He added 84 assists. He was a machine. When the final buzzer of the season sounded, the hockey world looked at the stat sheet in disbelief. Wayne Gretzky, 137 points. Marcel Dionne, 137 points. It was a dead heat, a tie. But the NHL doesn't share trophies. There had to be a tiebreaker. And the tiebreaker for the Art Ross Trophy is goals scored. By a margin of 2 goals, Dionne had done the impossible. He had stolen the scoring title from Wayne Gretzky in his first NHL season. It would be the only time in the 80s that someone other than Gretzky or Lemieux held that trophy. It was the peak of his individual powers. He had signed a contract that year worth $3.6 million, making him the highest-paid player in hockey history at the time. He was the king of LA. He was on top of the world. But this is where the story takes a turn, because while Dionne was winning scoring titles, his team was breaking his heart. Here is the cruel irony of Marcel Dionne's career. He was one of the greatest regular season performers in the history of sports. But when the calendar turned to April, when the playoffs began, the magic seemed to run out. It wasn't that he wasn't trying, it was that he was alone. In hockey, one line can win you games in October, but in April, you need depth. You need defense. You need goaltending. The Los Angeles Kings of the 1980s were unparalleled at scoring goals, but time and time again, they would run into a buzzsaw. If it wasn't the Islanders, it was the Oilers. Deeper teams that knew how to win. In his entire 18-year career, Dionne played in just 49 playoff games, winning only 3 playoff series. Let that sink in for a second. Lafleur and Bossy won more cups than Dionne won rounds. The critics were ruthless. They called him a regular season player. They said he couldn't win when it mattered. They looked at his stats, 130 points in the regular season, but then the Kings would lose in the first round. There was one moment, one glimmer of hope that defines the Kings era. The miracle on Manchester in 1982. The Kings were huge underdogs against the Edmonton Oilers. In Game 3, they were down 5-0 going into the third period. It looked over, but then the Kings stormed back. They scored 5 goals in the third period to tie it and won it in overtime. It is one of the greatest comebacks in NHL history. The Kings went on to knock out the mighty Oilers in 5 games. But then, same old story. They lost to the Vancouver Canucks in the second round. That was the story of his life in LA. Great moments, incredible stats, but always falling short of the ultimate prize. By 1987, Dionne was 35 years old and his career was in its twilight. And, driven by frustration with losing and contract disagreements, he requested a trade out of LA. On March 10, 1987, the Kings traded him to the New York Rangers. The Rangers were desperate. They were trying to buy a championship. They thought adding a legend like Dionne would put them over the top. He arrived in New York hoping for one last shot at the Cup. He was energized. In his brief time with the Rangers at the end of that season, he scored 10 points in 14 games. He wouldn't end up winning a Cup, but the hockey gods have a strange sense of humor. In the 1988-1989 season, Dionne's last, the New York Rangers signed another aging legend who had come out of retirement, Guy Lafleur. After 18 years of being compared to each other, Dionne and Lafleur were finally teammates. They were old men now, by hockey standards, but for a brief moment they sat in the same locker room, 2 of the greatest French-Canadian players ever, wearing the same jersey. When Dionne stepped away from the game in '89, the numbers he left behind were staggering. He had scored 731 goals. At the time of his retirement, that was the second most in NHL history, trailing only Gordie Howe. He had recorded 1,771 points. At the time, that was third best in history, behind only Howe and Gretzky. He had outscored Phil Esposito, Bobby Hull, and his rival, Guy Lafleur. And in 1992, he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. But his legacy is complicated. He's the poster child for great player, bad team, wrong market. Had he been drafted by the Habs instead of Lafleur, he'd be royalty. Had Kings management built more complete teams, he might have gotten his parade. But that's sports. Woulda, shoulda, coulda. What happened is what happened, and what happened is still staggering. For a decade, a 5'8" player nicknamed Little Beaver carried a franchise on his back and put up one of the most impressive careers in hockey history. His name may slip through the cracks. It may not be top of mind, but the numbers don't lie. Marcel Dionne was one of the greatest to ever play the game. If you're still here, drop a W in the comments because you're a winner for watching the whole video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.